We are doing champagne tasting today at Peter's place.
I hate when we taste champagne.
You don't? Alright, so it's a summer season, so I thought it's a good time to do champagne tasting.
There's lots of things to add about champagne. So champagne's made from 3 varieties, not always 3, but the 3 to choose from: Chardonnay, white skin grape, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, that are both dark skin grapes. And it's going to be reflected in the color of the wines. The dark skin grapes are going to give a tan colored wine. The wines that are 100% Chardonnay, Blanc de Blanc, are going to be lighter in color, higher in acidity. Color is also going to be influenced as to what the base wine is. If the base wine is oaked, as a minority of champagnes are, those wines tend to have a deeper color. Older wines have a deeper color, and also it's a function of the type of reserve wine used in non-vintage wines influences the color as well.
Whilst you make your Blanc de Blanc and your Tête de Cuvée, etc., the house, for the most part, we're not talking about Krug, but the house for the most part lives and dies by its regular cuvée. So that's where blending is absolutely vitally important, because they want to achieve time after time a product that is quote unquote the house style and is similar from vintage to vintage. For your entry level wines, A, they're not typically made from the very best cuvées in the cellar, and B, they are made to be more quaffable. So one of the pointers towards entry level wine is a measurable level of dosage. It's also my opinion from a lot of the tastings that I've done that it's very difficult to make a beautifully balanced wine at the entry level with extra brut or brut non dosé, because you just don't have the richness of the cuvée to support it.
Right.
Let's give it a taste.
Okay, let's give it a taste.
People assume that the toastier wines are the vintage wines,
Right.
when in actuality it's the opposite way around. So the toastier wines are usually the non-vintage wine, because the producers are combining different vintages, and the way they're combining different vintages usually is that they have a reserve wine, wines that have been aged in very different ways. Sometimes they're aged in a magnum, sometimes they're aged in a barrel, sometimes they're aged in a vat, and then how long it's been aged and how long that's been exposed to oxygen. So you have many different variables to create house styles, but also to create different types of champagne.
When you introduced the vintage champagnes, I thought it would be more complex, but it was more simple. I feel like I wasted my money.
It's more direct and more focused, but it's trying to show you the quality of the vintage and the unique characteristics of the vintage. By definition, almost, it's higher quality.
Right.
Higher quality, generally speaking, should give you greater complexity, but not greater complexity as in, the big things of complexity, but the nuance, the interplay of acidity and fruit and winemaking and all the rest of it. So if you can be sure that your vintage wine was not as complex, and
It's my problem, right?
no, then you should buy the other one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. For me, I find a non-vintage entry-level champagnes, generally speaking, to be too sweet. And so that means that I need to step it up, because I want something that's extra brut or non-dosé. Typically, if I'm looking for extra brut, I'm going to go for Premier Cru, because you need that higher level of quality.
20 years ago, 25 years ago, these same champagne producers would have been tasting that in California wines and would have said, ours are much better, you're not supposed to have this berry fruit in the wine. But now that they have...
That's one of the problems when you've got a halfway decent memory and you're old farts. Because you remember what it used to be like, and so you
Right.
can call bullshit on the bullshit. Overt fruit in champagne basically used to be considered a fault. And
Really?
now, today, we have to be more accepting of it because there's more ripeness. However, that having been said, because when you make champagne, you want an acidic, almost thin base wine. You don't have to wait for it to get overripe. You can pick unripe. In fact, I would go so far as to say that One of the reasons that we have champagne like this, aside from the accident of bubbles, is that in that part of the world, you couldn't ripen the grapes. Therefore, willy-nilly, you were making wine from unripe grapes. Well, all you have to do today is now you have the choice of whether to make wine from unripe grapes or not. You choose to make it from less than perfectly ripe grapes. I prefer flutes. Why?
So do I.
Yeah. The reason that I prefer flutes is that the producers of these wines have gone to incredible lengths to give us this beautiful lazy mousse that meanders through the glass, goes out to the edge, bursts in the middle with some bubbles that migrate out to the edge. And so the visual aspect of champagne for me is just requires a flute and doesn't do so well in glasses like this.
Right.
You've got much less, and so you can't see the meandering of the bubbles, the filigree. Now today you get the most beautiful hybrid glasses. Actual flutes with a long bowl like this, but then also with the tulip-shaped top. And for me that's the best, and I had some Riedels and I've just broken too many to use them today.
And I brought these glasses today because we're doing 2 tastings. And I
Right.
didn't want to schlep
I
14
get it.
glasses
Yeah,
with me.
yeah.
And I thought it gave us a talking point to talk about glasses. There are a lot of sommeliers that prefer drinking their bubbly out of this kind of glass. If you're drinking it fairly rapidly, in terms of the taste, the flavor, it doesn't matter. In terms of the visual aspect, I completely agree with you, and I like the tradition. The worst kind of glass you can use to drink champagne are these broader, these flat glasses.
Oh,
Marie
yeah,
Antoinette's
yeah.
breast.
Yes, Marie Antoinette's breast.
Yeah. One of the things that annoys me is I'll go into a restaurant where the somm is one of the cool kid somms. Not only do they recommend that you drink your champagne from regular white wine glasses, but they have thrown flutes out of their restaurants. That pisses me off.
For any sommeliers out there who are anywhere near me and they're thinking about getting rid of their flutes, throwing them away, give them to me.
If I don't finish a bottle of champagne, which I open, that's rare,
But
but if I don't, and I come back to it the next day, when the mousse is substantially down, because I will have consumed a lot of it before I put the champagne stopper on, then as often as not I do drink them out of these
okay.
to see if there's anything else besides
Oh, okay.
the
Good
champagne
idea.
character.
Okay, so the first wine. Should I do this one?
Yeah, go for
Yep.
it.
This is one of the slightly lighter colored ones in the group. It was overtly toasty on the nose, which to me, this is a non-vintage wine. It had good acidity, fairly good length, moderate complexity. It was a pleasant wine. Wasn't my favorite of the group, but very enjoyable.
Number 1, Peter.
This was my favorite wine. It was also the darkest, or one of the 2 darkest. Beautiful meandering mousse, yeasty, bready. I mean, for me, textbook in terms of not necessarily quality, but textbook in terms of the fingerprint of champagne. Full-bodied on entry. Perhaps possible to say on this wine that there are couple of wines actually that are more elegant, but there's an amazing amount of flavor here and lots of complexity. You know for sure you're drinking champagne. I thought this one might have a little bit of age on it. You can't tell because I thought it was non-vintage, and so you'd have to go in and have a look at how it was made. I thought they were all non-vintage
Right, they are.
and no Blanc de Blanc. I loved the wine. I scored it 93. I also thought it was the driest of all the wines, and I
The,
thought it
oak
might be
as well?
oak. I thought this one might have some oak.
Yeah.
I went back and I tasted it again. And also, as these warm up, the warmer temperature is not flattering to
No, it's not flattering.
to most wines. For me, one of the reasons that I liked it a little bit less than you did, Peter, is that some of that yeastiness and creaminess was, to me, turned into a bit of cheesiness. And so that was the reason for my cutting back on it.
I can see what you mean by that.
And again, we tend to be, sometimes we can be overly critical of wines, but that's just what we were trained to do. Would I be happy about being served this in a party, drinking it in a restaurant, drinking it in your home or my home? Sure.
I don't want to be served in a restaurant or at a party because that implies I have to share it.
You want to have it all to yourself? All right. So number 1 is Esprit by Henri Giraud.
It's a Nature.
Nature. So it's naturally made. It's there's a
Esprit.
dosage in it. 0 stainless steel, only small oak barrels and then
Yeah.
12% alcohol. This is very, very popular in Korea. So I wanted to see if you guys like it, and then you do.
I loved it. This was my favorite. I also thought I picked up the oak.
I believe they use their own oak. They source their oak from their own.
And you get some of the oak on the finish here.
Right.
And here's the point. So natural wines have either no added sulfur dioxide or sometimes a little sulfur dioxide on bottling. And the question is, how can you get away with it more, perhaps, with champagne than with other wines? And the reason being is that under pressure, right, the pressure itself is antimicrobial, which is a good thing when you don't have sulfur dioxide in the wine.
Number 2. This one was pinkish. The nose was quieter though. A smaller amount of autolysis here. A bit of lemon juice coming out on this one here, so perhaps a higher level of Chardonnay. On the palate, tight entry, taut, lean, but markedly sweet compared to the first one. High acid, you would expect that from champagne. A little bit of astringency there. So I liked the wine, medium long finish. I did not like it as much as the first one. I said it was, we already know, non-vintage, and I scored it 89.
You know, compared to the previous one, I found this to be fuller. The mousse was more aggressive in the mouth for me. You know, fairly good length and creamy. And again, I had the same thing with tannins. Unless there's some oak involved, there shouldn't be tannins in champagne. But let's see what it is.
Number 2 is
Kirkland.
actually the Kirkland champagne. Yeah. So this is $20. I wanted to include that in the flight
Do you
to
want to
see
try a
if
little taste?
and see if they can put up with other more expensive champagnes.
Very good value, right?
Yeah. For
Very,
$20.
very good, yeah.
I
For
agree.
$20?
Yeah, it's
Awesome
$20.
value. Awesome value.
Yeah.
So third wine, this was, compared to the first two, had a slight pink hue to it. A bit toastiness on the nose, full-bodied with fruit, more fruit than there was toastiness, and the fruit I got was more berry fruit. There's a nice creaminess in the mouthfeel, some slight tannin on the finish, and good plus to very good length. All in all, I like the wine.
Almost as dark as the first one, but actually not quite. But old pale brass, lovely mousse, very champagne, quite bready, saline entry. But I picked up what Patrick did, a little bit of astringency, lean, but very champagne. Also a little bit of sweetness there, not quite as much as the second wine, but some. I really liked it. I didn't love it, I liked it. I scored it 90.
Yeah, I'm in the same range.
Number 3
Qu'est-ce que c'est?
is Champagne Nicolas
Maillard.
Maillard.
Which
Yeah.
one is it?
Nicolas
Oh, Maillard.
Maillard. And this is Premier Cru. 54% Pinot Noir, 26% Chardonnay, and 20% Pinot Meunier.
Right.
And this one has a 1 gram of dosage in it.
So it's very low.
The fact that there's so little dosage,
Right.
yeah, it handled that well. Yeah.
All right. So number 4.
Number 4 was actually quite yellow, with less of the sort of coppery, brassy color coming from the pressing of the red grapes. Beautiful mousse, quite champagne, bready, a lovely yeasty character to this one, and also a hint of chalk here. On the palate, very complex. I really love this one, not quite as much as this one. I scored this one 92.
It was full-bodied. I like the creamy texture, nice acidity, very good length, and I thought the quality was very good.
Number 4 is Pommery.
Pomeray.
Yeah. So this is 1/3 of Pinot Meunier, 1/3 of Pinot Noir,
It's
and
a
then
third.
Yeah, $57. Bill, it's your turn.
Okay, so this is wine number 5. The palest in color of the wines, so it's a fairly light yellow. Initially, I thought there was a slight note of reduction on the nose. That's gone now as the wine has sat in the glass for a period of time. Nice citrus character more than berry fruit. This one had the best acidity and was the freshest wine. Good to very good length. I like the wine a lot. It was one of my favorites. I think 4 and 5 were probably my 2 favorite wines.
Very pale, the palest of them all. Beautiful bubbles again. Very citrus, lots of lemon, some yeast. Beautifully complex wine without giving up any of the elegance. And yet surprisingly bold on entry. A little sweetness for me, which took me back to the non-vintage style of wine. As I said, full yet elegant, medium, just lovely. I scored it the same as the previous one, which was 92.
Can we see what it is?
Let's see. This is a Piper Heidsieck. It's one of my favorite. So I picked it. Piper Heidsieck, that was $50 and 50% Pinot Noir, 20% Chardonnay, 30% Pinot Meunier, and 30% reserve wines is used. Dosage is 8 grams per liter, so it's quite high.
For me, the residual sugar would only matter as a function of how I was using the wine. If I was going to have this with some spicier food, I would prefer wine with some higher residual sugar. If I'm serving it to guests at a party, generally most people are going to prefer a wine with some dosage. I can be very happy across the board in terms of the
Of
sugar
course I
levels.
can drink it. It's a lovely wine, but I prefer, my comment has sweetness. But it's very good. What does it cost?
This one was $50.
And both Peter and I, in terms of the fruit character that we got on this, was citrus that we normally associate with Chardonnay. But that all said, the numbers don't lie.
Number 6, very pale, hint of copper, beautiful mousse. But on the nose, for me, the least forthcoming of them all. Nothing wrong with it, but just not much happening. Faintly Venus was the closest I could get to it. I loved the acid and the structure of the acid on the palate on entry, but I found the wine still bland across the tongue. I think it's a beautiful base wine, given that it's non-vintage, but not complex enough. Why? Because they wanted to get it on the market. If they would have put it on the lees for more time, it would have been better. This was, I think, not a defeat, but a less than great wine snatched from the jaws of victory. I could sure drink it, but it's my least favorite wine, 87.
I did get the copper now. Yeah, that's interesting.
I've got slightly pink. I agree with you. It was not generous on the nose at all, and it had pronounced berry fruit, good acidity. To me, it had a nice creamy texture, and the length was very good. I suspect that what you're calling the lack of complexity due less to time on the lees than how they store and produce their reserve wine. And so it's a less toasty style, and that so you're getting less richness from the reserve wine, but you're maintaining the fruit a bit better.
Yeah.
Again, it's a dealer's choice preference. And qu'est-ce que c'est? What is it?
Number 6 is Champagne Vimard Grand Reserve. It's a premier cru. 30% Chardonnay, 70% Pinot Noir. There's a 50% of the reserve wines previous 2 years, and then also barrel fermented with 10 months on the lees prior to second fermentation. 8 grams per liter dosage.
So again, if somebody prefers a toasty style of wine, this is not going to be the wine for you. If somebody prefers a less toasty, more fruit-driven style of wine, this would be the wine for you. A matter of preference.
It can't be cheap because it's Premier Cru.
This one was $55 in the United States, but I bet it's a whole lot more in Korea.
The last wine. Okay, so this is light yellow. For me, I thought there was some slight oak on the nose here. Toasty. I got citrus as the primary fruit. Nice acidity. It wasn't the longest wine, but fairly good length, good plus quality, enjoyable, pleasant.
I also thought I picked up a hint of oak. The faintest yellow, but with some pink. Tiny bubbles, really, really well done. Some complexity, lemon, warm bread, but just a hint of it. And then on the palate, big, full entry, very tasty, but not that elegant. Good body, nice finish. I thought I found some oak here, and I scored it 90.
Yeah, very pleasant. Let's see what it is.
This is a very popular, and I'm sure you know this one too. Louis Roederer.
Yeah.
So
very nice one.
Collection 243.
Roederer, what's it called?
Roederer Collection 243 is what it's called. So which one was your favorite one?
For me, my two favorites, when I was tasting them early on, when they were nice and cold, drinking perfectly, were numbers 4 and 5.
So my three favorites were 1, 4, and 5.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So 4 and 5, you both really liked it.
Yeah. I want to
Yeah.
congratulate you on a fantastic lineup.
Yeah.
Oh
very
yeah,
nice
thank
ones.
you. Actually, this was recommended by our subscriber. They wanted to see the NM versus RM. So we have 3 NMs and 3 RMs here, except the Kirkland one.
One of the things that these RMs are talking about, particularly the small wineries, is terroir. They say all the big houses source their wines from Montagne de Reims and here and there and everywhere, and we have an 8-hectare or 4-hectare plot, and all the wines are grown here, and what you're seeing represented here is our terroir. So we are making vin de terroir, whereas the big houses are not, other than for it to be reliably Champagne or Premier Cru or whatever it might be. So then I started to think about that, because how would I recognize that? And I look at the process of making champagne. You're picking unripe grapes, and then you're putting it through a very traumatic process of 2 fermentations, addition of sugar, addition of yeast. I mean, if you could do anything more to obliterate terroir, tell me what it is. So to start to talk all about terroir is a marketing thing for the guys who can only talk about terroir, because they're not sourcing grapes from all over the place. They're sourcing grapes from their own vineyard. So all of a sudden, by definition, and I don't mean to be harsh, but all of a sudden, by their own definition, they have the perfect terroir. They don't need to move anywhere else, and we should taste the terroir in the wine. I'm not going to say it doesn't exist, but I have yet to have somebody conclusively show that to me. When I think about terroir in wine, it's tenuous at best in all wines, and it's a hell of a stretch for champagne. Now I know the next time I step out my front door, there's going to be guys waiting for me with machine guns.
No,
But that's how I see
no,
it.
clubs, Peter. The suffering is prolonged with use of the clubs.
No, I don't have to suffer to drink any of these wines.
Yeah.
Though that said, right, there's, for the big houses, they have a luxury brought out of necessity based upon their sizes to have grapes sourced from many different places, and that gives more flexibility in terms of blending the base wine to have a house style that changes very little over time. I would imagine that the smaller producers are more apt to have change based upon vintage change.
Okay.
And then the other thing that I bring up, and I bring this up not only for Champagne, but for all regions that have been classified, that how does a classification based upon a completely different weather pattern, how appropriate is that for today? And in some places, the wines from the best spots 100 years ago or 150 years ago are still the best spots today, but in some places the increased ripeness is starting to be a big problem, right? So if you're in a place like Alsace, where you can keep some residual sugar in the wine, that gives you a little bit more flexibility. Wines that really didn't have any terroir at all, and often didn't have any good characteristics, were the wines just of the region, right? So the lowest classification wines in Burgundy or in Bordeaux, and then maybe a little bit above that, and those wines have benefited from global climate change. It's a fascinating thing how it's a sliding scale, and in much the same way, let's say in the Napa Valley, you have valley floor wines, and you've got wines on foothills on either side, on the east side and the west side. And depending upon the vintage, sometimes it's the foothills on the east side that produce the best wine. Sometimes it's the foothills on the west side that produce the best wine, and occasionally it's the wines on the valley floor. So it's hard to make sweeping statements. Things will vary from vintage to vintage, and the test of time is going to show ultimately that many of these places will no longer be growing the same varieties that they're growing today. Certainly will not be growing the same varieties 20 or 30 years from now.
When we first started to drink champagne, you sourced your grapes from the Montagne de Reims, from the Côte Blanc, and from the Vallée de la Marne. And those were considered the absolutely top areas. And then what they discovered was there was a whole lot of good particularly Chardonnay, coming further south from the Bar, and they started to incorporate that in their wines, giving them the opportunity to have a higher Chardonnay component and at a lower price. I'm not sure exactly what's happening now with global warming, but some of the new producers, the ones that are doing their own thing, they're in the warmer areas with their own little piece of land, and there are one or two of them that have only Pinot Meunier planted. So all of a sudden they're making wines from 100% from Pinot Meunier, which the houses that have been out there since who knows how long, certainly early in the 1800s or in the 1800s sometime, and have over years and years and years decided that the quality grapes are Chardonnay, then Pinot Noir arguably, and then Pinot Meunier.
That's what I thought.
These guys are making Pinot Meunier 100% and saying this is the coolest, the chicest, the greatest thing. And the cool kids Soms are buying into that big time, and some of the sellers of wine. So yeah, I'm still waiting, old fart that I am, to have a Pinot Meunier based wine that in all the things that I look for in Champagne blows me away. I've had some really, really good ones, perhaps even great, but nothing that blew me away.
And back to what we were saying about other places in the world that can produce some spectacular champagne-like wine. A place that can produce some wines that are very interesting and delicious, and virtually you never see them on the shelves outside of the producing country, is Switzerland. Though that said, we need to do a tasting with some other regions around the globe, and that will be fun.
Switzerland,
Tasmania,
Franciacorta,
and Trento. There are spectacular sparkling wines that you would, made from the same varieties, grown at altitude with much more sunshine, that you would never confuse with champagne, but some of them are spectacular wines in their own right.
Is
Truly
Ferrari from there too?
Ferrari's in there, and the ones from Ferrari are spectacular.
good enough to spray over Formula One drivers.
It's good enough to spray into cuff. So let's do a summary of what we learned today, right? For those that have stayed on long enough to see us at the end. So we spoke in some generalities about the Champagne region, though we didn't touch upon chalk soils and things like that. Though, again, as a region, a special terroir and climate that has not only enabled them to produce this style of wines, but that combination of factors, because they could not produce good table wines from Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, they then came up with this fairly complex method of production, which has held the tale of time, the test of time. They have been fantastic at marketing wine and controlling markets. It's become the ultimate wine for celebrations in many parts of the world, if not most of the world, and it's still a delight to drink. Wonderful food wine, and I hope folks learn something from the video.
More and more today with global warming, they make Coteau Champenois, an appellation for still wine. There's some beautiful 100% Pinots from Coteau Champenois. Of course, they're expensive, so it's a toss-up then between that and Burgundy in terms of how much you want to pay. But there's some beautiful wines some beautiful still wines, and more of them being made.
Peter, I haven't had Bouzy Rouge in years. Have you had it since substantial climate change?
Yeah, I have. I've had one within the last 2 years. And the brightness and forwardness of the fruit without losing the complexity was quite astounding. Yeah, because I remember, as Patrick does, I'm sure, we had Bouzy Rouge back in the day, and we said, why do you do this?
But that's all changed. It's a different game.
Yeah.
The NM's won over RM in this tasting. In the
So
same
Pommery
price range.
and Heidsieck are
yeah.
NMs.
Right.
Yeah. So the NM is
NMs, yeah.
Negociant Manipulant. Okay, the guys that buy in a lot of grapes and sometimes base wine and make it. Recontant Manipulant are the guys that actually
Grow the
make
grape.
the wine, most usually from the grapes that they grow.
All right, so hopefully you liked it. Give us some thumbs up, and see you next time.
See you next time. Cheers.
Cheers. Subscribe and like.
You okay? 터뜨려 champagne 손에 든 잔을 위로 터지는 sparkling Yeah 내일은 엘로미로 하루 내 cafe I just want a champagne trip 잔들어 우미야 모두 다 Cheers Yeah 99 크리스탈 소름 쫙 끝나지 않은 영 기분 오르막 크록도로 향해 취하네 you 달리 그리고 마지막 잘 익은 폴리처럼 마무리 블라인드하고 놀다 보면 어느새 한병 1년에 한 번은 마셔야지 살롱 그게 오늘이야 종